gentlemen, I am the president and CEO of the Mob Museum. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for what is the first in a series of 3 public forums focused on the future of policing. Now, we know that the issues to be discussed tonight are not new, but perhaps the urgency is. We all recognize that things changed quite dramatically back in May following the murder of George Floyd and the demonstrations that followed against police brutality and racial injustice. And in the wake of the outrage and all of the outpour of emotion, it's incumbent on all of us to now consider what comes next. What should policing in America look like? And how do we get there? And what does that mean on a national level? And where can we make meaningful strides locally? We have a terrific panel this evening who will explore these questions. There will be Q&A that follows the discussion. I know that many folks are watching on live stream, and you can also post, and we'll get questions to the panel if you have some. Before we begin, I also want to just take a moment and acknowledge some of our generous contributors. NV Energy, who supports our community safety forums, including the discussions that we've had on community-oriented policing. Also, the Shah Zion Family Fund, which helps us to engage in dialogue that is geared to improve relationships between community members and the police. And of course, the Stanley W. Ekstrom Foundation, for which our use of force exhibition and training experience is named. This is, for those of you that have not seen it, down on the first floor in the museum, and it is one of our most impactful spaces. It is an area where guests can explore some of these issues on a daily basis. So we thank our contributors. We thank all of you for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Shakayla Alvarenga, our Director of Public Programs.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all for being here. So tonight's program, Reinventing Law Enforcement, Changing the Culture of Policing, will tackle several subjects related to policing in America, including police training, demilitarizing the police, as well as how the perception of warrior versus guardian affects policing. And it is crucial that for the next hour and a half, we talk openly and honestly. I hope that when we leave this discussion, that you all will continue to educate yourselves, speak up, and be a part of the solution. And now with that being said, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists for this evening. On the far right to me is Lisa Mosley. She is the executive board member at the Clark County Black Caucus. Sitting next to her is Assistant Sheriff Chris Jones from Las Vegas Metro Police Department. And right next to me is Roxanne McCoy, the president of the NAACP Las Vegas. So before we talk about some of the biggest problems facing modern day policing, I want to speak about this moment right now. And so Roxanne, I'd like to begin with you. The NAACP has been a powerful voice in the fight for racial justice for years and years. And we've seen moments just like this one lose traction before. What is different this time around in regards to George Floyd?
Okay, first let me say thank you for having us here tonight, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue the dialogue that's been long overdue and needs to continue further. In my opinion, I think that what's different in the incident with George Floyd versus other incidences that has taken place around the country is that right now we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and all eyes are on just everything. There's not a lot going on across the world at this, there's not a lot going on. And with that being said, when George Floyd incident took place, all eyes were on that. Everybody had an opportunity across the whole world to see injustice right in their face. We had the opportunity to see just police brutality at its worst. And it's something that's been taking place across this country for a long, long time, that a lot of Black mothers are very much aware of, a lot of Black families are aware of, but it just did not get the visibility that it did when George Floyd was unfortunately killed. And it brought a lot of visibility to injustices that are taking place. It sparked protest, it sparked outrage, it sparked a call for change, not just in our local communities, but across the whole world. The whole world had the opportunity to see an unarmed Black man killed at the hands of a police officer. And it begged to question why. Why is this taking place? Why is this okay? Why is no one questioning this? And then what do we do as a community, as a world, to say enough is enough? And how do we move forward and make this better for everybody? And before George Floyd, that took place, we have to think about our local people that this has happened to. We've had Tashi Brown, we've had Charles Bush, we've had Byron Williams, and we've had across the country, Eric Garner. We've had so many of these lives taken away needlessly at the hands of police officers, and now it's time to begin talking about what reform is going to look like.
Lisa, would you also like to comment?
You know I would. So first, also, I would like to say thank you to Shakayla and Jonathan and the Mob Museum, and thank you to all of you who are participating and listening to this conversation. That says something about who you are, and the fact that you're listening says you probably want to see some things change too. I think what's different now is, first let me say, I think this moment is a culmination of things that have happened over decades in the past. I think everything that's happened in this country has gotten us to this moment. We have seen brutality, what we're calling police brutality, but we've also seen calls for change over years. So I think about politics. My work is in politics, working on political campaigns. I was most recently the Nevada political director for the Bernie Sanders campaign. And so when I think about all of the things that people are dealing with now, that this pandemic is highlighting, it's highlighting not only injustice, but inequity. It's highlighting inequity in employment, it's highlighting inequity in health insurance, health education, it's highlighting inequities across the board. And many of these inequities transcend race, they transcend class. So we're seeing a culmination of all of these different injustices and inequities that have been happening over the years. And I think what makes it even much more different now is it's not just one particular race of people that's speaking out and saying we are tired of experiencing the racism. We're tired of it, but other people are seeing it. So for us, it shows up as racism many times, but in other cultures, it shows up as those inequities in unemployment, health reform, all kinds of things. So I think we're seeing so many people are experiencing so many different things, and they're saying, you know what? We're tired. And then, Roxanne, you're right. Actually seeing a man murdered right in front of our eyes for seemingly no reason. I think in the past, those things that we've always found a way to justify those murders. Well, they weren't complying, or they had a criminal record. Some people, they just didn't, something was wrong. We've always found a way to justify it. Well, this time there was absolutely no justification for that. This man wasn't fleeing, he wasn't doing anything wrong, he was complying with all of the directives, as we know, and yet he was murdered. And so people seeing that, it touched a nerve for so many of us. It touched it showed the humanness in this person. And so I think those are some things that are different now. And people are just at the point where we're saying enough is enough, not only with police brutality, but with so many other things that are happening to us across this country. So the timing is right.
Thank you, Lisa. And so I think one of the most important topics I should say, that we can discuss first is generally the culture of policing. So Assistant Sheriff Chris Jones, I would like for you to speak to the notion of warrior versus guardian, the warrior versus guardian mentality in policing. What is it, and does police training, do you believe that police training emphasizes the warrior mindset rather than community policing?
Sure, great question, and I want to say thank you for having me tonight. And Roxanne and Lisa, you're absolutely right. You know, your question, if I could just say briefly on that, you know, the country was feeling significant divisiveness before this happened, the pandemic and everything, and I think that has built up to where people are paying more attention now. They had time to pay attention because their life was kind of put on hold. But I agree with each of you on your assessment. It's got to change. So when you talk about police training and you talk about guardian versus warrior, and you look at the 21st Century Policing Task Force that President Obama put in place back in 2015, 2016, they addressed that specifically. Are we teaching our officers that they need to be the guardians of our neighborhoods, and with that, be woven into the fabric of the neighborhood? So it's not just the police who are ensuring that the neighborhoods are safe. It's not just the police that are ensuring that crime rates go down and that the kids can go out and play in those neighborhoods. It's that collaboration and that cooperation between the police and the communities. And so that's what we have to instill in our officers. Listen, there are very bad people in this world, and we all know that, and I think we all acknowledge that. And there are times, and we've seen that right here in Las Vegas, 1 October, when we have to have a mindset to go in and save lives. But that's such a small amount of what we do in policing, and that's where we have to get with our training. We have to have our officers understand that the community is what we're supposed to be doing, the guardian of that community, teaching that community and interacting with that community on how they make it safe, how we do things, and really the most important part is asking that community, what do you expect of your police? What do you want from us? And we've done that. Roxanne and I have had many conversations about like that. What is it that how do you want to be policed? And where do we fit into your community? And when we start doing that, which we've done over the years, Metro has always led the way with collaborative reform and led the way with community policing, but we can always get better. We make mistakes, Roxanne, you mentioned some of those. And those are tough because we know how hard we've worked. I know how hard I've worked over my 27 years. I know how hard Sheriff Lombardo works every single day to make a difference. And when we make those mistakes, I want you to know it hurts us as well. But I think we do things very well here in Las Vegas. We do teach guardian versus warrior, and I think we prepare our officers very well for that. But the most important part of that is that we listen.
And so our other panelist joining us via video conference is Sheriff Michael Chitwood, and he's from Volusia County, Florida. And so I'd also, Sheriff, like to get you in here as well. I want to hear your perspective of the warrior versus guardian mentality, and I'd also like for you to share with us some of the training tactics that you implemented when you became sheriff in Florida. Oh, you're muted.
I'm going to unmute. Okay,
there we go. We got you.
Okay, we're good. Thank you, Shakayla, for inviting me. And I am so impressed by the passion of the opening statements that came out because the challenge for us in law enforcement is to challenge the conventional thinking of use of force. And as my colleague just said from Las Vegas, warrior versus guardian, what I see is the unions perpetuate that warrior mentality. If you make any kind of a change to your use of force policy, if you try to shift to a guardian mentality, you get tremendous pushback from the unions. You're going to get officers killed. You're going to get people hurt. And what I want to share with you is I was fortunate enough a long time ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago, to go to Scotland to see how a police department, where they don't have the gun issues that we have, there are 6 million people there, but they still deal with people who are armed with edge weapons, petrol bombs. How do they recruit? How do they train? And one of the things that they use is what's called the critical decision-making model. There are 4 components to that, and it is drilled into the heads of the leadership, and the newest recruits. Number one, first and foremost, every decision that you make, the sanctity of human life comes first. Second thing is your ethics of your organization and your community. Third thing is your values. And the last thing is proportionality. So whether you're writing a parking ticket or you're dealing with an armed mentally ill person, those things come into play. And when you talk about the warrior mentality, just think of this for a minute. A mother calls you because her son is in mental crisis. He's naked in his living room, swinging a machete around, telling his mother, call the cops, I want to die today. And we show up, and what do? Ma'am, step aside. We know how to handle this. We go into the house, and we shoot and kill him. And the mother says, I called you to help. You killed my son. And our response is, it's lawful. And that's where the rethinking the conventional use of force is. We train by the law. And under Graham versus Connor, if you feel your life is in danger at that time and you use deadly force and can articulate it, it is called a lawful shooting. It's awful, but it's lawful. So the sanctity of human life has to be at the forefront of everything that we do. And we have to remember there are certain times when you respond that time, distance, and cover are an officer's best friend. Use time, distance, and cover, and then reach out when somebody's in mental crisis to the professionals who can help you negotiate. It's not solving the problem the quickest. It's getting the best results and your bang for your buck. So that warrior versus guardian mentality, it's been a battle for years, and the unions are the ones that are basically holding the change forward when it comes to progressive police managers.
Sheriff, what specific training methods did you learn in Scotland?
The first thing that I learned was how they recruited. You know, when I became the sheriff in 2017, and I'm in 33 years of policing, started my career in Philadelphia Police Department, was the police chief in Daytona Beach for 10 and a half years. And I was shocked to find out as the sheriff, when you applied to come to the Volusia County Sheriff's Office, the first thing they did was take you out to the range. And if you can shoot a certain percentage, I think it was 90 out of 100 or whatever it was, you could then move forward in the process to become a deputy sheriff. And I thought to myself, that's ludicrous. The least thing that we do in your career is use your firearm. You know, we use so many other tools, so we scrapped that. And I brought an organization in called PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, because in my first 6 months here, we had 6 shootings. All 6 were lawful. Some of them were active shooters. You had to do what you had to do. But other ones were rushing into a scenario and creating a scenario where you had to shoot. So they did in the second half of 2017, they did a complete study of everything in my organization: culture, policy, procedures, training, recruitment. And we implemented those things: time, distance, and cover, sanctity of human life, not shooting at fleeing vehicles, less lethal when you show up to these scenarios. Do we have beanbag rounds? Do we have other types of methods to try to de-escalate the scenario, including walking away? Somebody who's suicidal, who has not committed a crime, why do we have to storm that house because he has a gun and he's inside his own home? Sometimes just backing off and reaching out to their mental health counselor, that's the best avenue. So based on those things, in 2018, we trained the entire department. We even gave out awards. The 2 highest awards you can get is Valor. You're engaged in actual combat with an armed and dangerous adversary, like an active shooter, or de-escalation. Those 2 are the top awards you can get. It's just as important to save a life as it is to stop an active shooter in a school. So in 2018, we trained. In 2019, what we saw after this 1 year of training was use of force declined by 50%. Arrests, overall arrests dropped from almost 13,000 to almost a little over 9,000. Injuries to officers, and this was key, injuries to officers dropped by 50%. Use of force dropped, injuries dropped, arrests dropped, and crime dropped by 40%. So in the early 2020, when we sit down with my command staff, I said, somebody argue with me that what we're doing is wrong. Tell me where less arrests, less use of force, less injured officers, and less crime, where is the negative? And how do we now continue with this mantra going forward? We know we're going to have spikes and different things, statistics are the way they are, and how do we recruit better? How do we not recruit the fastest runner, the person who does the most push-ups, the person who's most proficient in firearms? How do we recruit people who have that critical thinking and reasoning, that ability to handle what's coming our way?
Thank you. And so I think that you bring up a great point when it comes to police unions, because to me personally, within this discussion that we've been having over the past few months, I feel like we have failed collectively to properly address the discussion surrounding police unions. Unions are extremely powerful, and one thing that I've learned, I used to be a reporter, and for most of those cases that we've covered regarding, use of force and officer-involved shootings, when it comes to unions, what we hear or see most often, cases across the country, is that they are going to protect their own. And so my question, and Assistant Sheriff Chris Jones, maybe this is something that you can answer, but where is the line of, when it comes to unions, of accountability and protecting and serving the community as well?
Right, and that's something we struggle with. As the Assistant Sheriff over Law Enforcement Administration and Detention, I oversee internal affairs, so I deal with those issues on a daily basis. And so, interesting enough, after George Floyd was killed, I had a number of state legislators come to me and say, this is crazy. How come when you have an officer who's been accused of wrongdoing, you don't take them off the street, you don't put them on desk duty? I think everybody's familiar with kind of that term. And the simple answer to that was we can't, because 289, the NRS that protects officers, says we can't. And so there were a number of laws put into place at the last regular legislature that really tied our hands from administration's perspective. And that frustrated us. We spoke out against it. Many family members spoke out against it, but it passed. And so we have to follow those laws. As you may be aware, this last special session, most of that was repealed, which we asked for. It had to be repealed because we have to have a mechanism to hold officers accountable. And there's a national call for a national database so that if I fire an officer here, they don't go to another jurisdiction and get hired. And we totally support that. I don't want to go through all the work it takes to terminate an officer just to see them go to another jurisdiction and potentially do something within that community. So when it comes to the unions, I work with them every day. I have to. That's my job. But I can tell you that it was very frustrating to have a lot of these laws in the Senate Bill 242 was what it was, passed. And it really, we saw the effects in a very short period of time. And thankfully, we were able to get a special session and have most of those repealed. But it does tie our hands. The unions have a purpose, right? All unions do. Salary, benefits, make sure that the employees, whether they be police or regular labor, are treated fairly, right? And treated right, and they have a good salary and all those things. But when it comes to protecting those bad ones, that's where it has to stop.
Thank you. And so our next topic goes hand in hand with the warrior versus guardian mentality, and that's demilitarizing the police. How do you create a community policing model when there are military-style weaponry, like grenade launchers and armored vehicle weapons that are used in war on our streets? And so, Lisa, I know that this is something that you have been particularly vocal about. Do you believe that the police should be demilitarized, and do you believe that reallocating funds away from the police department to other agencies is a possible solution?
So there are a few answers to that question. And if I may, I'd like to go back and just touch on the warrior versus the guardian mentality. I think it's problematic that we even contextualize this conversation within those terms, the warrior versus guardian, because each of those terms negates the community's ability to oversee itself. And if we're talking about a community policing model, obviously the warrior mentality is not going to work, because it's a model that says we are going to come in and we are going to tell you what to do and how to take care of your community. But the guardian mentality denotes almost a parental role. And it says to me that even though this is a gentler approach, we don't see you as a community that can take care of yourself. So I think if we're talking about community policing, and Sheriff Chitwood, correct me if I'm wrong, when we're talking about community policing, we're talking in a model that engages and works with that community to keep that community safe, to keep that community protected. Well, I don't think either the guardian or the warrior mentality does much for that. So I think we have to think about changing the terminology, and it's more than semantics. I think we have to think about changing the terminology and how we even view the role of law enforcement in those communities. It should be neither a warrior mentality or, in my opinion, a guardian mentality either. It should be a partnership where we're coming in and we're working with you. We're not your guardian overseeing you, and I get it. We call police for all kinds of things, and I think that's a topic for maybe another discussion. But I think we have to think about changing the terminology and changing how we even think about the role of policing community. So, as far as militarized police forces, and should we challenge the budget or change the budget or reduce the budget, I think when we think of terms of militarized police, we think of big tanks and we think of guns but we're not thinking about the mentality. There is a militarized mentality in police force, and that comes from the fact that many of the officers that are on police forces are former military. Well, military officers are trained to protect this country. That's what we do. We train them to kill. We put a gun in their hand and we teach them how to go out and kill. Well, it's very hard when someone comes out of the military to take that mentality away. You don't take that thinking. And here, I'll share this with y'all. It's something I don't talk about much, but I am a former law enforcement officer. I spent 13 years with the San Bernardino County Probation Department. And I can tell you that much of that training that I went through is still in me. I still sit with my back toward the wall, making sure that I'm not boxed in and making sure that I can see all the way around me. I still think of people sometimes as, and I hate to say this, threats. My head is always on a swivel when I'm somewhere. I'm constantly looking around because as an officer, you're taught to do so. You're taught that your safety is the utmost importance. And so you're always thinking about your safety. The other thing that I was taught in the academy, and I remember going through this, is everything we did was from a perspective of officer safety, and so everybody that we encountered was a potential threat. So take that with somebody who's former military, and you put a gun in their hand, and now everybody that they encounter is a potential threat. How many of us have ever been pulled over by an officer for a ticket or just pulled over for something? How did that officer approach your car? Their head is on a swivel. They're looking. You might even see another officer's car come in because their safety is of the utmost importance, and everyone is looked at as a threat. And it's just the way police officers and law enforcement officers are trained. And so when we talk about training, we have to go all the way back to think about first of all, where are we getting our officers from? How are we recruiting officers? Who are we recruiting? What is the mentality of the people that we are recruiting to serve on law enforcement agencies? That's question number one. Do I think we should be thinking about demilitarizing the police? Absolutely. But we have to go back even further than that. To start having this conversation at the point of demilitarizing police, we have to go even further back than that and talk about how we're recruiting officers, the mentality of the people that we're recruiting. And because this happens in the academy, once you get through the academy and you get through your probation, you're on the force. And so now you're talking about unions. It's really hard to get rid of an officer, a bad apple. It's almost impossible. And Chris, I think you and Sheriff Chitwood can speak to this. It's really hard to get rid of an officer who is out of compliance or who's engaging in misconduct. But if we go back to the beginning of where we're recruiting these officers from, we don't have to worry about that. So I think we have to think about who we're recruiting. What is the consciousness of these people that we're recruiting for law? I think we need to think about the mentality. I always say, I'd like to see us implement implicit associations tests. That's just me as a psychologist. Those are tests that will let you know how much bias someone has in them. Well, if we implemented something like that, how many of those folks could we weed out in the beginning? Because by the time they get through the academy and get on the force, it's a done deal. So to answer your question about demilitarization, absolutely I think police should be demilitarized. But it's not just the physical appearance. It's not just tanks and guns. It's a mentality. And to demilitarize someone's thinking is nearly impossible. So if we can weed out those folks in the beginning of the process and not even get them on the police force, I think that's where we should be thinking about this conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. Sheriff Chitwood, I'd also like to hear from you regarding this, about demilitarizing the police and reallocating funds from the police department.
Yeah, I would like to tell you that the previous speaker, and I apologize for not knowing your name, you hit a lot of great points. You'll find, I think most law enforcement folks would agree with you on, especially the implicit, I just wrote that down to take notes on that, was the implicit associative test that you talked about. You know, the term demilitarization has been around a long time. When J. Edgar Hoover went to arm FBI agents when they were going after bank robbers in the 20s, there was a huge outcry from the American public not to arm federal agents. The fact of the matter is, though, there is a need for that equipment. And I can tell you, just several days ago, we were hit with a tornado here. And the only folks that had the equipment to get into those neighborhoods for rescue and relief was the sheriff's office. High water rescue vehicles and our Bearcat loaded with medical personnel to get in there. So when used properly, there's a reason for them, not to mention the tactical end of it when you do have active shooters. When it comes to defunding, 80% of my budget, I have a $90 million budget, I have 1,000 employees, 80% of my budget is spent on human resources. That is salary, pension, and benefits. That remaining 20% pays for my leases of buildings in neighborhoods. It pays for gas. It pays for electricity. It pays for community engagement. It pays for training, education, and technology. So when my budget gets cut or remains stagnant, which this up and coming budget year it is, the first things that will get cut, and they are going to get cut by county council, is training, community engagement, technology, and education for our folks. So you have to look at that. On a flip side for me, I have 33 vacancies that I cannot fill. We are about to roll out next week in working with the mental health providers, because under Florida law, there's certain things that as law enforcement officers, 40 hours, 80 hours worth of training that we can do for critical incident. Then there's another level above that that can make decisions. And then there's the top level where you would have somebody with a PhD. I can't pay a PhD to be out on the street with me. However, I can sign a contract where I'll have people on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm going to buy iPads for all of those mental health professionals so that when we get a call for somebody in crisis, all the sergeants are going to be armed with the iPads. They can call these folks and use the iPad to get what we need done from mental health professionals. And it's something we've never done before, and I think it's something worth trying. But when you look at our budgets, and like I said, not only as a sheriff, but as a police chief, there's not a lot of wiggle room in there. And just to backtrack with what Chief Jones said, we're the same way with the unions. The Florida statutes give the unions all the power. And what the previous speaker talked about, once they get over probation, man, they are protected. They're in a shield of armor. To fire them or discipline them, it's you're just banging your head against the wall.
And I'd also like to talk about this locally too, Assistant Sheriff. Do you believe that the police should be demilitarized or no?
So I agree with my counterpart in Florida there that, he and I have both been through some of the most horrific things you can go through when it comes to active shooter and those kind of situations. So we do need that equipment, whether it be for emergencies that are man-made or natural disasters like the sheriff mentioned. They have to exist, but we have to use them in the proper way. You have to have stringent policies that tell an officer when they can deploy the rifle, when they can deploy those Bearcats. And not only that, you have to hold them accountable to that, because you can make all the policies in the world, any policy you want, but culture in a police department will eat that policy for lunch. If you don't have the right culture, and if you don't have the right accountability when it comes to these tools and these resources and these weapons, we have issues like we have today. And so what we've always done with Metro is when we get a new piece of equipment or we get something, we make sure that that policy is best practice. We make sure that we look out at other agencies who have implemented this tool or this resource before. We write that policy and then we train on it. And as we go along, if we see that there's some abuse of it, or if there's this tool or this implement is being used in the wrong fashion, and it's not contributing to us being part of that community, and it just can't be used to show that we're an occupying force. When you go back to the guardian and warrior mentality, the police cannot be an occupying force in a neighborhood. So when we use that equipment, we have to have a reason for it. And then after we use it, one thing we do at Metro is if we have a search warrant or a barricade or a critical incident within a neighborhood, and it requires some of those implements to be brought in, shortly after that, we're doing what's called a trip, which is a walk through the neighborhood where our officers, and oftentimes we have our faith-based partners with us, we'll go through that neighborhood, we'll knock on each door and we'll say, hey, did you see what went on out here? We want to kind of explain to you what occurred, what we did, and see if there's anything we can do for you. And we have some faith-based partners here with us. If you need support, if you're scared, or if you're worried, or if there's something you want to talk to them about that you don't necessarily want to express to the police. So we go through those neighborhoods to make sure that we're explaining ourselves, why we did something, why we had to bring those specific resources or those implements out, and that it was for the safety of the community, and so that we could de-escalate it. And so when you talk about de-escalation in these implements and these tools, Bearcats and rifles and low lethal, we don't have grenade launchers, by the way. I just wanted to say that much. But we do have low lethal implements and low lethal tools. Those are oftentimes our best resource for actually de-escalating. It may seem kind of counterintuitive, but if we can bring a low lethal implement in or a low lethal tool in and utilize it and take that person safely into custody and prevent us from having to use deadly force, to me that's a sense of de-escalation. So your original question, I know it was kind of long-winded, do I agree with demilitarizing the police? I agree with making sure that any resources that police have that give that warrior look or that militarized look must be used very, very, very carefully, and we must understand what we have to do after the usage of those tools.
And so I think, Lisa, you may have brought this up before, or Chitwood, but it's about recruitment and how do we find those good cops that we want on the force, that we want to protect our communities. Can you talk to us a little bit about the recruitment process here, Assistant Sheriff, and what goes into it as well?
You know, fortunately, we don't. The first thing we don't test the ability to shoot a gun. And I'm glad the sheriff in Florida recognized that very quickly. Kudos to you, sir. Nice job. That's part of the national narrative. How are we hiring our police officers? What are we looking for? And I'm happy to say that we do an extensive psychological background and assessment on our.
Oh, I passed, Chris, so I'm not sure that's.
Oh yeah, I did too. So maybe we better change that. And think about that. And does it do enough? Probably not. I can tell you that we have tried to keep up with the changes in that respect. It is expensive. The sheriff in Florida talked about how 80% of his budget goes toward salary and benefits, and that's pretty much standard across the country. So changing a recruitment process when you have these things in place is going to take money, but it's imperative that we do that. We have to look for people who are community-minded, first and foremost. There's some, listen, military, I love our officers who are former military. We got to keep hiring them. I got to agree with you on that one, or got to disagree with you on that one. How's that? But that has to be the first test. Are you community-minded? And then we have to have our police department be representative of our community. If our police department doesn't look like our community, we have issues. Ferguson, Missouri is a prime example. I think I could walk into any neighborhood. It's just my character, right? Just my nature. But we need officers that reflect the community. We worked hard at Metro to do that. We have a large Hispanic community here. I'm happy to say that we've done a very good job recruiting Hispanic recruits. We fall short with African American recruits. We fall short with Asian recruits. We're doing really well with female officers. And that's a good thing, right? Because they bring something new to the table. I think less intimidating. They listen more. They talk less than us men do. And they tend to really listen and key in on certain things that help de-escalate situations. So recruiting-wise, that's what we have to focus on. Community-minded first. All that other stuff we can teach you.
Roxanne, would you like to comment?
I agree in terms of our recruiting is that it does need to reflect what our community looks like, and too often it doesn't. And so when it doesn't, then we have kind of like conflict or really a lack of understanding that takes place between the different cultures. But in terms of Metro, I know that you guys do a very, very good job. But in terms of African Americans and recruitments, there's still a huge level of distrust there. And so as long as there's distrust there, then it's not an opportunity to build a relationship. And so often in our communities, and this is something that I hope to continue to work with our police department to change, is that when most of our children are encountering the police, it's always in a negative connotation. They're seeing someone be arrested, their parents, or they're being harassed or something like that. And so we have to just start changing that mindset, like you said, to be more community, to where we're building a relationship, to where we feel like you're there to protect and to serve us, not to just watch over us to see what we are doing. And then I think that would change that mindset to where our youth, or the people that look more like that community or the African American community will feel like this is a trustworthy profession. This is something that I can get into and that I want to bring back to my community and to be able to protect them. So we have like some basic fundamental things that I think that we have to go back to in order to change that mindset to get people to where I trust you and I feel comfortable with this, and every time I look at you, it's not something negative that's coming to mind, and it's something that I could be proud to want to be a part of.
Shakayla, can I jump in there real quick?
Of course.
I just want to, and I don't have the answer, so I'm gonna state a question knowing I don't have the answer, and there's a lot of smart people out there that can help us. We have a huge problem recruiting African Americans in the state of Florida. In 2018, roughly 4,900 people passed the certification exam to become law enforcement officers in the state of Florida. 555 were African American, 1,100 were Hispanic. The Hispanic number over the past 5 years has gone up incrementally. The number of African Americans has gone down incrementally. There's 367 police departments in the state of Florida. If you divide that, I'm not good at math, 367 into 555, or even counting the Hispanic, 1,600 people, we will never diversify. So my question to the folks on this panel, how do we drive those numbers up in the African American and the Hispanic and the Asian communities to say that this is a noble profession? And if you want to be part of the change, you have to be part of the organization.
Anyone can answer.
And if I could please, we have the Sheriff's African American Recruitment Council on Metro, and it brings another perspective to us when you oversee recruiting. What do we need to do? And it starts to build those relationships. And like Roxanne said, when you have an African American officer go out to that community and the kids see them and they see them as their first name, or they see them as somebody that's playing basketball with them. It doesn't have to be an African American male, but it helps, right? Because it changes their perspective and they look up to them. And so we gain a tremendous amount of knowledge and support and help from the Sheriff's African American Recruitment Council that we have within Metro. And Roxanne, I think you even spoke to that group before. But we struggle, just like the sheriff in Florida, and I think it goes back to it's not something we're going to change overnight. We have to be very active within that community, and we have to build that trust through things like our African American Recruitment Council and community policing and working in the neighborhoods and making them see us as people and as somebody there to support the neighborhood rather than just doing the bad things.
And if I may too, also, when you look at these departments and then you have leadership in these departments that's not willing to stand up to say, Black Lives Matter, other lives matter, that's a problem. It's a problem that it sends out a message. And so I think that if we want to be inclusive and bring in more people, then I think it's important for our people that are in leadership within these departments to be able to stand up and say that Black lives do matter, and they're not willing to do that. We're willing to say all lives matter, but not specifically making sure that I am a community of people that you're looking to recruit to say specifically that Black lives matter to make me feel like I'm important.
Thank you very much.
So here's my answer to that. I think when we think about police recruitment or law enforcement recruitment, we start too late. As I remember being in supervision in the probation department that I worked for, many of the African American candidates were lost in the background process. So number one, when you think about education and you think about who has the highest rate of dropout, it's usually African Americans. And so you need that education to be on a police force or to be in law enforcement. And you could have, I'll just use a round number, 10 African American applicants, candidates for law enforcement. By the time they get through the testing process, you've probably lost about half of those. By the time they get through the background check for felonies or criminal background, you may have lost another 2. By the time you go through the academy, you may have lost another 2. So now we're down to maybe 2 African-American candidates or Latino candidates. So my point is, when we're thinking about the future of law enforcement and who's going to be on those forces, we have to go back and look at our younger kids. I think we're starting really too late. And maybe if we started in elementary schools and police going in and mentoring those students and creating a different image of police, and those kids now see police in a more friendlier way. They see those police are coming in, they're coming to their classrooms, they're talking to them, they're working with them, they're helping them to build self-esteem in themselves, and they're helping them to see themselves in a different perspective. And that's for all students. And so by the time you get into middle school, the idea and the perception of police is different. And so the recruitment process has to start way back even then, not just when somebody is an adult and they're out of high school. And I know some of the recruitment teams go into the high schools and they start talking to high school seniors. But many times those high school seniors may already have some negative interaction with law enforcement. They may already not be on the track to graduate from high school. So we have to start thinking about our kids and all of the components, whether it's education, making sure those kids have a stable home, working with those community organizations to make sure those kids are stable enough where they're not getting into trouble, creating mentorship programs and all of these things to push these kids in a certain direction where we need them to go if we want to see them on law enforcement agencies down the line. So we have to start with our younger kids, recruiting those kids and instilling in them being in law enforcement. I remember as a kid growing up, we wanted to be police officers because, I mean, that was like the coolest job. It was like the coolest thing. All the kids in our neighborhood wanted to be wanted to be on the police department. But seeing what's happening with law enforcement, the spotlight that's been placed on it in such a negative way just makes certain communities pull away. They don't want anything to do with law enforcement. And Roxanne, is what you said, it's a trust issue. So I think going back, starting with our younger kids, getting into those elementary schools, getting into those middle schools, and beginning to create a more positive image of law enforcement, and working with those families, working with those kids to make sure they have all of the resources that they need, including a good education, including a stable home, and helping them to stay on track, we will see more conscious officers and more officers of color getting on the force if we do some of those things.
And just to piggyback on that, Lisa, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things that our local NAACP has been working with and hopefully building a partnership with the Metro Foundation to start implementing just those very things, is that if we want to see something different, we have to do something different. And so we have to start with our kids. When we start looking at them in the cadet program when they're in high school, most of the time, like Lisa said, all our kids are already disqualified already. And so we have to start going back when they are much younger and building that relationship, meaning taking our community policing truly to that community, to those schools where those children are, and start making them feel like, I can trust you, that you're there, that you're consistently there, and you're not there just because there's a problem. You're there because you care about me as a person. And when they start getting that type of mindset, and then it's consistent on a consistent basis, then it starts changing the mindset of how I'm seeing you as an officer. And now I'm seeing you maybe there as a protector. And then if I have a problem, then maybe I'm going to go to you and say, you know, this is what's taking place at home. And then maybe you're stepping outside of your comfort zone to make sure, hey, is mom and dad okay? Is the kid safe there? And when we start when they're young enough like that and start changing that mindset, by the time they do get to be middle school or high school, they're the perfect candidates. Absolutely. And then you could fulfill all the different races and categories that we need to try to fill so that it's reflective and inclusive of communities in which we're trying to serve. But when we're waiting until they're adults or almost out of high school, it's too late by then.
And then the one other thing that I will say is, and I think Metro probably does a good job of working with community-based organizations. I know you have a really good relationship with the NAACP. But I'll say this, the Clark County Black Caucus is an organization that focuses on policy. But our chair, Yvette Williams, who's in the audience, is one of the most staunch advocates for education. And so I would think that a partnership with an organization like the Clark County Black Caucuses, who focuses so much on education, and working with them and say, how can these two organizations come together and get into those schools? Because we have a really good relationship with the principals and the superintendents and everybody to work on African-American kids and other minority kids getting a good education. And by good education, there's a lot of components of that. That's almost like a catch-all phrase. But working with the law enforcement, how could we work together as an organization with law enforcement to, when we're going into those schools, you're going into those schools with us. We have our black student unions almost in all of the high schools now. We're also getting into middle schools. So maybe a partnership with our black student unions, because we get those kids pretty early, and going in and just being there, being present, and helping those kids when they're doing their activities or doing some of their outings, just would help in creating a friendlier image and get those kids, and get also the officers just a different image of what black and brown and yellow kids are doing, and just a different vision of those kids.
I agree. You know, we work closely with Veterans Tribute here in Las Vegas, which is a high school that's geared toward public safety, first responders. But really, that's not enough. We need to do things like Lisa's talking about. I'd be very open to that. And the issue that we do find is that when we start working with kids who are in high school or even younger, you have to be 21 to be a police officer. So between the age of 18 and 21, we lose a lot of really good candidates. So that's an area where we need to get better. What do we do with these really, really good kids that would make excellent police officers once they graduate high school until they get 21? And we have to put something in place to where during that time they're employed, right? They have meaningful employment. But more importantly, I think we have to put something in place to where we're assisting them with that education component, right? We've got 2-3 years, maybe more, and with the way universities and colleges are structured nowadays, they could have a bachelor's degree in that time. You know, in those 3 years, and online, we have so many opportunities there, and that's really a segment that we have to start focusing on.
Thank you all. So this is an important moment, because if we don't tackle this topic head on right now, as history has shown us time and time again, we will find ourselves in the same position. So before we open this forum up to any questions here, I want to leave this conversation by asking each of you, how do we ensure that history does not repeat itself this time around?
Who do you want to start with? I think we ensure that history doesn't repeat itself by every one of us, whether we're in this room or we're in our homes. Change starts with us. So often we look externally to other folks and saying, well, what are they doing? How are you changing? But when we change our thinking, when we change our actions, when we change our views, and we expand our minds, we expand our hearts, and we expand our thinking, when we change, what's external change? I always say the external is a reflection of the internal. I'll say that again. The external is a reflection of the internal. So when we begin to change how we think, how we view people, and we begin to say, how am I contributing to this problem? No matter how small or big it is, we all have a contribution that we're making to what's going on in the world right now. So when we address that within ourselves and we begin to change that, we will all see the world begin to change.
I'll jump in here real fast. I think when I opened up, I talked about the challenge for all of this is to challenge the conventional thinking on use of force. All the world watched George Floyd murdered on television. And I think the momentum is there for change amongst all races, as other panelists have said, but we should never forget the words of Mr. Floyd's little girl who said, "My daddy changed the world." It's our responsibility to make sure that her words come true in our words, our deeds, and our actions as we move forward from this point forward.
I agree with both of you. I think we have to listen. So many times we hear it and it's kind of off in the background, and as humans is what I'm talking about, not just police. We're so preoccupied with our lives, and it leads to what Roxanne said at the start of this, that because of the way things are right now, people had time to pay attention, and they had time to sit there and see the complete disregard in that officer's face when he was doing what he did. Complete disregard for life. And even though it is very painful to see that and watch that, and it makes you sick to your stomach, people have to see it. And we have to have that constant reminder that we've got to change as a society. Not just as police, but as communities, as police, as a society. We have to put human life above all, and we have to have conversations, frank, hard conversations, and everyone has to be open to change. The divisiveness, the us versus them has got to stop. And it's my responsibility, it's the sheriff's in Florida responsibility, it's Sheriff Lombardo's responsibility, which he wholeheartedly pushes with us every single day. Every single day, make sure that we're out in that community, talking to the community, working with the community, meeting with people who are in that community, meeting with those community leaders and those community groups that can reach the children, that give us ideas, that tell us when we get it wrong. And if there's one thing that Sheriff Lombardo has taught me, is that you have to listen to your critics. You really do, because it's easy to listen to the people that support you, right? And I told Roxanne this earlier. I said she's probably one of our biggest critics, and has really beat me up a few times on some conversations. And I may not have walked away agreeing with her, but at least I listened to her. And that's what we have to continue to do in law enforcement, or if we haven't done it enough, we need to do it more, and that's listen to the community.
And for me, I echo the sentiments of everybody previously, but the change we want to see begins with each of us individually. It's each of us. If I want to see something different, I have to do something different. If I have some expectations, I have to be willing to stand up and speak out. I can't stand on the sidelines and watch injustice take place anywhere and just not say nothing. And then I will just leave with the quote that Dr. King says, "He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." We can't sit on the sidelines anymore and be silent. We have to stand up for injustice that's taking place around us if we want justice to be fair for all of us.
Thank you. Is there anyone here in the audience who would like to ask a question to one of the panelists? There is a mic heading to the left side, right over here.
Okay, my name is Joe Cortez. I'm a former international boxing referee. I'm an alumni of the FBI at the inaugural class 2004. I've always been involved with the community, and I always pay close attention to what's going on. I want to make a difference in my community and around the world. One of the things I always felt was in the police academy, and believe me, I thank you law enforcement individuals, thank you for your service. And as a veteran myself, I just want to say that I always cared about people, even when I was in the Army. My mentality was to save lives, keep people focused, and keep them going. One thing I don't like is the way that sometimes an incident occurs where a life was taken by an individual that maybe was threatening, but why did they have to really shoot him to kill him up here? Couldn't they use a taser gun or something, or a rubber bullet or something? If you know the individual has a mental issue, can't we maybe address that differently, but not with a real gun, but maybe with a taser? Take him down like that. Well, if you are going to shoot him, if you think that your life is in danger as a law enforcer, maybe shoot him in the leg. Can't we train him to shoot him in the leg, do something different, maybe a tear gas or something, to make him surrender without actually having to kill him? The other thing is, Jack Lazarazzo, Jack Lacerado was the Clark County School District Police Director back in the 90s. And Jack Lacerado got a grant from the Justice Department, and he called me in and said, Joe, I want you to help me out with a program. We got a grant from the Justice Department, and I want to see if you can help me out with the school district. I said, okay, I like to do that, but I like to start with the middle school, the younger kids, and then work with the high school kids. So anyway, I went to J.D. Smith Middle School. I was there with the kids. I had an office there. The deans would come to me and tell me, Joe, I got a couple of kids I want you to talk to this week. And same thing with the high school. I went to Rancho High School to talk to the kids there who were having some issues in school. So I was able to take these kids in to an office and talk to them about my background growing up in Spanish Harlem in New York, and how I became a 6-time Golden Glove champion. I became a fighter, and I was a referee for 35 years. So when I saw them pictures of me refereeing Mike Tyson, Oscar de la Hoya, Julio Cesar Chavez, Larry Holmes, Chitwood, all the great fighters, I said, I referee all these guys, but I grew up just like you guys. I come from a single-parent home, and I needed somebody to give me some guidance. And I got involved with a fighter named Gaspar Indian Ortega from Mexico who moved to Spanish Harlem as a professional fighter. He took me under his wing when I was 12 years old and kept me on the right track. And I needed that coming from a single-parent home. We have 4 boys at home. Thank God we all came out clean. Everything was good with us. But we started young, so I think middle school was a good place to start. And I think it's a kind of a program with the Metro Police. I know Joel Lombardo very well, and we've talked in the past about trying to get involved in the community, but I think we should get more athletes and community leaders to go get involved with these individuals, these young kids at a younger age, and get them on the right track. So if you guys could try to get a committee together to make sure that we get not only law enforcement, but other community leaders or individuals in sports that these kids look up to, maybe we can help out. And I'm not looking for money to do that. I do that for the love I have for the kids in here in Las Vegas. But I think that we should do a little bit of that more around the whole country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you first to the Mob Museum for putting this on today. My name is Yvette Williams. I'm chair of the Clark County Black Caucus. And I just wanted to add further to the conversation around our youth. One, Veterans Tribune, I don't know if you're aware or not, but there's a huge disparity of black kids participating in these magnet and CTA programs. So Veterans Tribune, for example, only has about a 4% black student population. I have spoken to Metro before, talking about the program that you have going on in high school, and they said that they don't believe there's not any black students participating in the program there at Veterans. So it's an issue of where are you recruiting kids? How are you going about to put programs in place? You have to make sure you're going where black students are, if that's your target population. The other second thing I wanted to mention as well is it seems to me with all the investment the state of Nevada has put dollars and resources into CTE programs, where we even have a diploma now, that we should be able to put together a CTE program for those kids graduating. We're at 18, 19, 20. They are getting training, kind of a pre-academy internship, being paid by Metro, so that they're already learning the skills that they need. You're developing your pipeline, and you're actually putting in place really great officers because they've been trained over 2-3 years on a pathway where they have an AA when they finish, and not many credits required for their bachelor's, so that if they decide they want to seek a higher position, like an investigator or a lieutenant, you know, they require a degree now. So this puts them on the path. But what's most important is you're keeping those kids engaged and involved, and it seems to me we should be able to put something like that in place so that we're not losing our kids, and we're actually putting in place kids from our community with the skill set they need to be better prepared when they get to Metro as a duly sworn-in officer. So that would be my suggestion as it relates to that. The other thing I wanted to ask about for Metro is what kind of supports are you giving our black officers? because they're under a tremendous amount of pressure just being black and a law officer. So what kind of supports does Metro offer our black officers to stay in public service in that way? They get a lot of pressure from their own community even, and not only that, they have to watch how other law officers treat their own people, and don't think that doesn't have a psychological impact on them and on whether or not they want to continue to be on your team. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I can't tell you that I understand how they feel. I just don't. I can never put myself in that position. But I can tell you this, that one of my mentors is sitting in the audience right there. I think he's about to speak, retired Assistant Sheriff Greg Mccurdy. The way I feel about it is, I don't have to be black or Hispanic or white or whatever to sit with these officers and talk with these officers. I always tell them, I can't understand what you're going through, but I can help you. I can give you guidance. I can, if you're struggling with that, I can set you up with the right people. And so beyond me, what we've done is we've had peer groups, especially within the jail. Deputy Chief Myers, who oversees the jail, he works for me. He's had several sessions where they brought in a group of black officers and white officers and Hispanic officers, and we've just let them talk. How do you feel? How has this impacted you? How does your family view you because of what's going on? Do they see you as an enemy now? Do they see you only as the cop and not the brother or sister? So it has to be hard on our black officers. We have a very robust police employee assistance program within Metro that's always there for them. I myself mentor a number of officers and meet with them on a weekly basis to check on them and see how they're doing. And we make sure, the other side of that is from a diversity perspective, employment diversity perspective, we make sure that we send a message at my level and above that it's not going to be tolerated. We are not going to tolerate any kind of diversity issues on this department or somebody saying something that's not appropriate or thinking this is a joke, and we deal with those swiftly. Our officers know if they do something like that, they're going to have to answer for it. And so it's my job to make sure that continues, that we continue to mentor all of our officers, especially officers who are black and maybe struggling. Because like we've said so much in this venue tonight, we have a hard enough time recruiting them. We have to keep them. And we have to have all those mechanisms in place to support them to make sure that they don't leave this department.
I just have a follow-up question to that. Is when the officers, especially the African-American officers that are within the force, what type of support is given them in order to promote and move up within that chain of command? Because I happen to know that higher up in Metro, we already have very few African-Americans that are already there, but they're not promoting like the other officers. And so what type of support is given to them so that they can put themselves in a position to be in higher leadership within there?
Right. We have formal and informal programs that we mentor officers with. We lost to retirement. Happy for these guys. They were great guys, good men. We lost Assistant Sheriff Tim Kelly to retirement and Assistant Sheriff Charles Hank. And like I said, one of my mentors, Assistant Sheriff Mccurdy, to retirement. And you're right, we struggle with that. We struggle with enough African-American officers coming into the department, and because of that, we struggle with enough of them promoting. So, like I say, we mentor, we guide, we coach, we do all of those things that help to promote our officers, because, like I said earlier, we want our department at all ranks to look like our community, to reflect our community, and so we put an emphasis on that, but we do struggle, and sometimes we do fall short, simply because we have fewer African Americans on the department. So when you have fewer that are eligible to promote, you're certainly going to have problems moving on up. It is an issue that we work on constantly, but we do have to get better at that.
Thank you.
How much time we have? No, just kidding. My name is Greg Mccurdy. I worked 30 years in Metro from 1983 to 2013. Been retired now 7 years. Grew up in West Las Vegas, proud to always say that. I have a lot of things I can comment about, but it would take a lot of time tonight, and we don't have it. But one of the things that always struck me and what caused me to be a police officer is because I didn't like what I saw with police officers growing up. When you talk about recruitment, a lot of times what you find is people who, in some communities, will get a warning, in other communities will get a citation, and then it escalates and then becomes a criminal record. So they become ineligible to be police officers. I know that firsthand because I recruited as a young cop in 1985 to 87. So I know exactly what was going on, and I talked to a lot of black people, I talked to a lot of Hispanic people, I talked to a lot of people. I went into the neighborhoods in Gerson Park, for who might remember that. I recruited there, recruited all through the West Side, and it was very tough. So my question to Chris and to Sheriff, what have you guys done to look at the hiring standards to make them applicable to 2020, recognizing that not all people have been treated equally through the criminal justice process?
Assistant Sheriff, thank you. Assistant Sheriff Jones, if you don't mind, I'll go first. Assistant Sheriff, thank you for your career so you know firsthand what's going on. The first thing is, I'm a huge proponent for our juvenile citation program here in Volusia County. And exactly what you said, in one neighborhood, you can steal a $20 worth of candy and you're getting a felony conviction. In another neighborhood, you're going to steal $20 worth of candy and they're going to drive you home to your parents' house and drop you off on the doorstep. What we've done, the biggest thing I think we've done is the drug usage. I can tell you honestly, I never smoked weed in my life. I know my kids have smoked weed, but we've lowered that threshold from 5 years down to 12 months to realize that. And then I try to look at when we hire you, every one of us makes mistakes. Some of us get caught, some of us don't. If it's not a crime of violence or a sex crime, and you're 22 years old and you've gone back to school and you've tried to get your, an associate's degree, or you have a really good work ethic and your employers are saying this guy comes to work or this girl comes to work every day and does their job, they're the kind of people that I'm going to gamble on, because you made a mistake when you were younger, and now what have you done since that mistake? So we try to vet every single applicant on their own merits and not compare them to a standard. Obviously there's a standard when it comes to a crime of violence, as opposed to a retail theft, or, you're the passenger in the back seat of a stolen car and you get caught because you were the slowest runner. There's different things there that we try to look at. And to get to the other point we talked about when it came to promotions, I'm a firm believer in MBWA, management by walking around. And I make sure that when I stumble across our minority officers, all officers actually, and let them know, hey, there's a sergeant's test coming up, or I have a scholarship that you can go back to school to pick up your associate's degree or your bachelor's degree for free through our foundation. I think you need to apply and put my name down as a reference that we talked. I think when the leadership gets out and does that, and the leadership gets involved in the recruiting process, looking at an individual, the whole individual, not the incident, I think that opens more doors. That's just me.
Sheriff,
Go ahead,
you want me
Chris.
to cover that real quick? Just briefly, so in 2015, I want to say, 2015, Sheriff Lombardo decided to turn our recruiting and our human resources back over to a commissioned officer. He felt that it was better suited and we could make the changes, Sheriff Mccurdy, that you had talked about. And so I was the fortunate or unfortunate one that was chosen to do that. And the first thing we did was we took a look at our hiring standards and how we needed to change those. And that was before marijuana was legalized for recreational use here in Nevada. And at that time, we were already reducing those requirements for drug usage. We realized that we had not kept up with the times. You know, society changes. Feel about it how you will, but nonetheless, it does change, right? And so we had to adjust that, Sheriff, to meet some of the demands that we needed. And it's just not right? You have to look at, we have this person who may have been 15, 16, 17 years old, and we all know the decisions we make when we're that young, right? And they did a couple of things, but now they're 21, 22, 23, and they're really good people, and their values align with the department's values, and they have that community-minded character about them. So we started to relax those drug usage requirements. We started to look at, like the sheriff in Florida said, if it's not a violent crime and it's not a sex-related crime, was it a young kid? It was just a mistake at the time, or they got themselves in a situation, or they came from a neighborhood where it wasn't really just the procedural justice wasn't there, right? It wasn't fair, it wasn't equitable, it wasn't impartial. So we looked at all of those standards, our drug standards, Sheriff, and we changed all of those. And I'm happy to say even since then, we've changed them again. It's partly because of the change in the law, but also to adjust it so we could bring more candidates in.
I applaud both of you, and I did know a little bit. Let me take this thing off. I said I applaud both agencies for what you've done. I did know a bit about Metro, but I was really curious about Florida. But one of the other things now that's occurring, and then I'm going to sit down, is that we are having a retention of police officer problem in the United States of America right now. We are having a retention of police chiefs in America. And one of the biggest tragedies in leadership right now is the fact that Carmen Best was forced out of her position in Seattle. She's one of the best police chiefs I've ever met, one of the best black women I've ever met, who had the strongest leadership qualities of a person. This is a problem, and I see the sheriff up there shaking his head. When I look at what's going on in San Francisco, for those who don't know, I am still a member of Police Executive Research Forum, and I have been a police reformer, worked in the San Francisco PD and St. Anthony, Minnesota. So I've been able to see other police departments beyond Metro. So that's a problem that I saw two great men leave Metro because they were able to retire. The executive staff no longer has any diversity as far as black males. That, for me, that hurt me a bit, Chris. Nothing you could do about that, and I get that. But when you look at these issues, what do you think we need to do in policing to change some of we have a retention of good people leaving. We have a negative retention of bad people who we can't get rid of. So it's a confluence of conflict, period. So what do we need to do?
Right. Assistant Chief Jones, let me jump in here real quick.
Sure.
I just did an interview on this, and I've been doing this for 33 years. I'm a second generation cop. My dad did it for 35 of them as a police chief in 3 separate places. And just what you said, Assistant Chief, watching Chief Best leave, watching the chief in Atlanta leave, watching the chief in Portland, Oregon leave, we are losing the best and the brightest, progressive, reform-minded leaders. We're just, because we have elected political leaders who hit the easy button, and they don't understand policing, they don't understand what it's like to get quality individuals at the top of your organization, and they jettison them for the simple fact of, well, this will make it better overnight. In reality, you're throwing 20, 30, 40 years of experience, reform-minded, progressive leaders who have helped move policing forward in this country, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get off on a tangent here, but what they did to Chief Best, they forced her out. They cut her pay knowing that she would leave, and they knew what they were doing. They wanted her out because they didn't agree with her philosophy, or she wouldn't come into line with them. And there's going to be, there are huge repercussions that are going to occur in American policing when you knock out, as you said so eloquently, the leaders, the brilliant people, and you allow, for lack of a better term, these bad organizational terrorists to stay and win out? I don't know the answer of how you stop that, because the mayor's the mayor, and that's the one good thing about being the sheriff. I am only running every 4 years. When I was a police chief, I was running every day.
Yeah, I agree. The people that are best suited to institute reform are leaving, and that's a shame. So just to add to what the sheriff in Florida said and what Sheriff Mccurdy said, a lot of decisions are being made on emotion. So for me, what I would say to those who are in the positions to call for resignations or to make those decisions that are making some of the best police chiefs in the country resign, just take pause for just a minute and think about what you're doing. Let the emotion subside. Really look at the individual that you have in place, like Chief Best and the other chiefs that the sheriff mentioned, and not make that knee-jerk emotional decision that you're really, really, really going to regret. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in some of these jurisdictions. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in Seattle and Portland and Atlanta, where, like the sheriff said, had some of the most progressive police leaders that I've ever seen. I really don't know the answer to that, and I really don't know what the outcome's going to be, but I will bet you that it is not going to be good.
Thanks.
But may I say something quickly?
Sorry, Lisa.
I just want to remind us that we had the first African-American woman as a police chief here in Henderson. And she came in and was making efforts to reform that department there, and she was forced out because people didn't align with what she was trying to do. She was one of those progressive officers, progressive chiefs, who was coming in and working to change what you mentioned earlier, Chris, was the culture of policing. And what I think is happening is there's so much resistance from within to change that culture you're talking. You've got progressive leaders in policing, like Sheriff Chitwood, like yourself, and others who want to come in and change the culture of policing. But there's so much resistance from within, and people wanting to hold on to that image of police as Gestapos, as that militarized officers. They want to hold on to that image of officers and what we have held up, what police force has been. So when you have progressive folks that want to come in and begin to change that model of policing and move to a more friendlier, more community-based police, there's so much resistance from within. And then when you have mayors and you have politicians and you have those elected officials who support that, you have those police unions in place, we've got to begin to start thinking about not just changes within the police department, but changes in those support systems that uphold those models of policing that just no longer serve us. And that means those elected officials, that means those union folks, that means those mayors, that means all of those folks that are helping and supporting to upholding that system. We've got to think about getting those folks out too.
You just hit the nail right on the head, because the union that fought that police chief in Henderson is the same union that stood behind the mayor and the city commissioners or city council folks when they were running for election, whispering in their ear, "We got your back, she's got to go." And what did they do? Rather than have the intestinal fortitude to say, "No, we need to change and be progressive," they fell in line to keep their jobs and let the union dictate what was going to happen. You hit the nail right on the head.
Got to go to.
We'll just end with these last two questions here.
I'm Tristan Wade. I'm just a normal citizen, but I know times are turbulent right now with the pandemic and everything that's going on with the protests and law enforcement and racial injustice and everything like that. And I've experienced some power-hungry police and people that haven't really been lawful when interacting with them. And I remind myself that I know not all police are bad, that police are good, they're supposed to serve the community, but I want to ask Sheriff and Assistant Sheriff, what would you want to say to the community? What would you want to say to the public who sees everything happening, but also wants to respect what you guys do in your work and have a mutual respect when encountering each other? Because I know the police and law enforcement are getting a bad rep right now, but what would you want to say to the community if you could speak to us to try to bridge that gap?
I'll start right away. I've been doing this for 33 years. My dad just retired for 55 years. I don't know anything other than law enforcement, and the overwhelming majority of us are men and women who want to make things a little bit better than we found it. And I think you would be surprised as I sit here on this panel tonight and the panels that I sit on, and I think both assistant chiefs will tell you there's more common ground amongst us than there is a difference. There are a lot of points that were brought up tonight that I agree with. Some of them I don't, but there's a common ground there. And I want my community to know that I care deeply, not only about law and order, I care deeply about the quality of life. I care deeply about our school system and our children being educated. I care deeply about medical care, the disparaging in there, and it exists. I mean, anecdotally, I just got over COVID-19, and I can tell you that being the sheriff, I absolutely went and got tested and was treated completely different than somebody else was, and I know that was because of my position, and it shouldn't be that way. Everybody should have access to rapid testing. Everybody should have the access to the care that I got to get back to work in 14 days. So I think that when you look behind this badge, the overwhelming majority of us have those same fears, those same cares, those same worries. And I would say that we don't support the unions that back these guys. We don't support the union leader in Minneapolis who's screaming for the ousting of the police chief up there because he's not doing the right thing. And that guy had 27 complaints against him. The overwhelming vast majority of us were in this to make our communities a little bit better. And for all of our hard work, what happened in Minneapolis, the negative impact is it drove us back in community relations, in my opinion, 20 years. There's a positive that's going to come out of that, and it's what we're doing tonight and what's been going on around the country. There is change coming. It's coming, and everybody sees it, black, white, brown, or yellow. The question is, we got to stop talking at one another. Let's talk to one another, and let's come up with the best way to move forward, build on successful concepts, eliminate the weak ones.
Thank you. We'll take another question.
Good evening. So I just want to make my question really quick and to the point. It seems like tonight that we've kind of established unions are a big issue, if not the biggest issue of what's going on in our country in terms of this wall division between officers and the rest of us. So my question is, since you can't quite defund unions, how would we go about as regular civilians to put them in place? Because it seems like they are, I don't play chess, but it seems like they're the important piece in this whole puzzle. And so to kind of dismantle that whole situation, I want to know from the panel, what can we do? And it also, in turn, for our sheriffs, going back to your budget really quick, I want to know, how do you guys go about with your trainings? Because it seems that, Las Vegas seems to be really good in terms of the whole nation, but I am kind of concerned in regards to what your training process is and how does it correlate with therapy? Because just because you go and do to the shooting range doesn't necessarily mean that your headspace is there to go out and service the public.
There's two questions in there.
Yeah, sorry, I tried to sneak them in.
Yeah, that's okay. So I would say, to answer your first question, the first question was, what do we do about the unions? And I'll go back to what I said earlier. Unions were established for a reason within labor in this country. And there's still some very useful reasons for them to exist. But what I would say is that the public needs to educate themselves, and our elected officials need to educate themselves as well, because many of them supported that Senate Bill 242 that passed a few years ago. Many of them. I think there were only 3 or 4 that didn't vote for it. And you can look that up. It's readily available on the web. So take a look at that, and how can you contribute to that is to educate yourself, and then be engaged and talk to your lawmakers. Express your concerns. Understand these laws that they're voting on and the impact that they could have. And so when the community gets involved in that, and they put pressure on our elected officials to say, look, this is going to tie the hands of police administrators when it comes to holding officers accountable. Do not vote for this or do not support this as it's written, because you're really going to exacerbate the problem rather than solve any problems. So that's my answer to that one. And then secondarily, I think you were asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of hard to hear up here, what do we do with our training? How is our training structured? And I can tell you this, that in 2012, Las Vegas Metro went through collaborative reform with the Department of Justice and the COPS office. We were the first agency in the country to do that, had 75 recommendations for our agency and how we train, how we better prepare our officers, that we put the sanctity of life in our use of force policy, that we focus our training on de-escalation. Because I can tell you that much of the reality-based training that's in law enforcement has scenarios that ended with a shoot scenario, right? The subject went to the point to where the officer, the answer to the question was to shoot the individual. That's wrong. Like the sheriff in Florida mentioned earlier, the use of our firearm is so minuscule within your career. Why are we putting that as the focus? So what we did is we changed completely our reality-based training to where when the officer used de-escalation techniques, they won the scenario. The subject complied. They were able to get him into custody. And so what that does is it sets a mindset in the officer to when they go out to the street and they're faced with some similar situation, they look back and they realize, hey, I did this and I used these de-escalation techniques and I called in extra resources and we set up containment. We slowed the action. We got supervisors there on scene quickly to help take command and control of the situation. And then we started that dialogue and we brought clinicians in, or we brought our negotiators in. We have every single officer on our department trained in crisis intervention. Every officer is CIT trained. That was one of the mandates or recommendations that came out of our collaborative reform. So switching that mindset, changing from every scenario that we put an officer through requires them to shoot, getting rid of that and changing it to the scenario now calls for you to de-escalate the situation, get additional resources there, and bring this situation to a safe resolution.
Thank you. And we'll just have one last question here.
I am going to be very quick. First of all, I'm from Washington State, so when you said that about Chief Carmen Best, I totally understand. I want to just say that I am also a part of the alumni of the Academy of the FBI, and I've participated in some wonderful activities with a lot of children in the schools here and in the community. And I think it's a start. I'm not going to say it's the finish line, but it's a start of what I see the children being able to experience with being interactive with the police department here. And I think that we need to grow and expand on that. And I think that Roxanne and Lisa, can your communities be a part of the volunteer process because the police departments don't have all the resources financially? Can they be a part of that participation to allow the police departments to be able to go into those schools and help build that community up? Because I think I agree completely, starting at that little age where they see that police officer as an inspiration and maybe curbing that where they might get into trouble and giving them that chance to not get into trouble. So can your communities be a part of that volunteer side of it, I guess?
Great question. And yes, our organizations are a part of it already.
Good.
But the missing piece of it is the consistency from our police department. That's the presence that's missing, and that's the relationship that we're trying to build there. And so I'm sure as the NAACP, along with the Black Caucus, we do a lot of work together in terms of our youth and collaborating on trying to make sure that they are inclusive and they have the wraparound services that they need. We have the capacity to be able to work with our police department to bring in programs, to implement programs that we can have going on a consistent basis, not just here and there, but consistently, and be a part of their classroom, be a part of their morning activities on a regular basis. And so our foundation of our organizations is there. We need the partnership from our community policing to also now take that part up and pick it up and participate with us.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming to tonight's event. We really, really appreciate it. We do have another event in this series, The Future of Policing. It will be held on September 22nd, and that one will be called Race and Policing in America, A History of Conflict. As I mentioned, it's the second Future of Policing program, and in that program, we are going to explore the historical context behind all of this. So thank you, and thank you to our wonderful panelists as well for joining us for tonight's important discussion. May we all strive to be better and do better. Thank you.